Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's the CJ. I want to give you guys a quick look at my Aquamaxx T1 Calcium Reactor setup. And I say setup because this whole thing was provided to me by Marine Depot. And I really appreciate you guys for giving me the opportunity to, use this product, review it, and share it with everyone that may be curious. Now, with that being said, I'm very, very excited to use this on my 120-gallon system. Having a calcium reactor really sets no limit on the amount of corals and the amount of growth and the amount of consistency that I should be able to pull off in my 120-gallon tank. So for those of you all wondering, why use a calcium reactor when you can use a dosing pump or, calculating your auto top off, all of those things seem like an easier solution. Well, honestly, I'm not going to tell you they're not, but what I will say is I believe a calcium reactor is going to make things a lot easier when it comes to the additional elements that I'm going to need in my reef tank. I'm not saying I'm an expert in the hobby. A lot of people, may know more or less, but when it comes to going beyond the top three, the magnesium, the alkalinity, the calcium, and the way they work in your reef tank, what do you do as far as trace elements? How do you know how to balance those things out? I think that a calcium reactor, and the way it works by melting, the neomag flakes for magnesium and the aragonite media, which is basically old corals, and breaking those things down, and all of the trace elements and everything being dosed to your tank equally and in the correct proportions is really going to make things a lot easier for me as I take this next step in the hobby and try to venture more into SPS and, more of the stony corals that are going to need those kind of things. So, that's just one of the main reasons that I want to use a calcium reactor. Now, I will admit, when I first started this hobby, calcium reactors seemed so far beyond me that I just didn't even want to touch them or even try to learn about them. But as with anything in this saltwater hobby, there is a learning curve, but once you get past that curve, things start to become clear and things get really, really simple. And that's the same thing with this calcium reactor. It's basically two parts I had to understand. The first part was the CO2 portion, the CO2 tank, the regulator, the solenoid, and basically how to control the amount of CO2 that's entering your actual calcium reactor. And the second part is the calcium reactor itself. So let's take a quick look at the Aquamaxx T1 Calcium Reactor. Now this is a basic, upflow single chamber reactor, and it's rated for up to 300 gallons, so that should be plenty big enough for any needs I'll have in my 120-gallon system. And the way it works is really simple. You got an input for your CO2. It's a bubble counter. It goes directly into the recirculating pump, which is a cTech 0.5 pump. Now this pump has two purposes. One is, to inject the CO2 into the canister, and the second is to help recirculate that water over and over and over to help melt the media. So, I'm glad they didn't skip on the quality. The cTech pumps are definitely really, really quiet. I've always had great experiences using those pumps. Now, any and all water entering the reactor does have to pass through this pre-filter media first, and then it hits the flow restricting valve. Now that valve's important because whatever water's entering your reactor is basically going to be the same drip rate or the water exiting your reactor, which you don't want, to be too high. Maybe a small drip, a little drizzle, nothing more. Keep in mind, a majority of the flow inside the chamber is actually handled by the recirculating pump, so it doesn't matter how slow it's going in. Now when it comes to the way this works, water does enter through the top, goes straight down the middle tube, hits the bottom, and then forces its way back up through the media, then exits through a quick connect hose on top. Now this reactor does also feature a pH probe, which I'm not using yet, but we'll cover that more later down the road whenever I do the install. So that's pretty much going to cover, the Aquamaxx calcium reactor setup, and at least all of the equipment I have so far. Now let me answer two questions I know you guys have. The first one, how are you going to monitor your pH? And the second, how are you going to install this thing? Well, honestly, there's so many different ways when it comes to monitoring the pH inside the reactor. I'm either going to get a pH controller or some kind of pH monitor, or if I run across some kind of Apex or some kind of actual tank controller, I'll use that. Now when it comes to install, I have options there as well. I can either tie this into my manifold, put it right in line with the actual carbon reactor I already have, or I can run this with an external pump, a Tom's Aqualifter pump, and put it inside or outside of my sump. So as you guys can tell, ton of different options, ton of different variables that I'll have to figure out for me as far as what's best in my system and my situation. But the great thing is, I'm bringing you guys along for the ride with me. So for those interested in calcium reactors or how they work, hopefully it gives you an idea of the content I have coming for you. And for those that are like me, that are curious about, the effects of a calcium reactor with an algae scrubber, how they'll work together and help each other, that also will be documented too. So I'm going to cut this vid here. If you guys are interested in any of the products I've shared with you, I'll put all the links down below for Marine Depot if you want to go check them out. And as always, hey, you guys like, comment, subscribe. You guys keep doing what y'all do. Y'all be easy. Happy reefing.